So you're going to get a little bonus at the end of this tutorial where we're going to talk about gating reverb. Some of you might have wondered, why didn't he talk about that in the actual tutorial? And the god honest reason is just that I completely forgot about it because I never gate reverbs. I actually never use gates. In the span of all of the times that I've produced music, the only times I've used gates are doing podcasting where I want one microphone to turn off when somebody isn't talking. And even then, gates can be a little bit finicky. So in the actual like modern age of working in the digital audio workstation, we're so blessed with this great ability to control our amplitude envelopes just from a clip gain. So we can click and we can change things around. We can duplicate the sample, non-destructive audio editing. And when you have those features, it actually kind of takes gates out of the equation, especially if you're not familiar with working with them to begin with. This is something that really is kind of translated over from the analog days where you just didn't have this sort of fine-tuned control, and where if you needed to cut out background noise, a gate was the best way to go about doing it. Nowadays, we can cut things out manually. And so I find with gates, especially gates, probably of all devices, it's either a old school thing that you use and you're really efficient with them and you can set them up in a split second, or you're perhaps a little bit new school and you never have figured out how to really get them to work and do what you want consistently, or it just doesn't sound right to you. That's kind of the camp I fall in. So I'm just being honest with you guys up front. There's nothing wrong with working with gates, and I actually recommend it if you can set it up quickly. But for some people like myself, it's always been a bit of a struggle. If you're familiar with or own something like an SSL channel strip emulation, you'll notice that there's a gate there. And what that really means is that there was a gate on every single channel there on the SSL that was used quite frequently, especially if you had to worry about things like wire hum or background noise. The gate is able to get rid of that. And since we're not going to be talking about gates a lot on this website in general, we need to first do a quick review of what a gate is. So we have this signal here, and we're going to do a bit of a hypothetical example on how to work with a gate. And let's just play it back first, and then I'll explain what's going on.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a sob of pain. A sense of awe and wonder I may never well define, for the thoughts that come in the shadows never come in the shine.
So what we're going to imagine here is that this portion right here is actually just something like background noise, like a hiss or a hum. Obviously, it's still a part of the poem, but I think this will help you understand. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of that. So what are ways we could do that? We could obviously just chop that part out, and that's probably the way I would go about it. But you can also use a gate to do the same thing. So if we look at this dynamics device, we can actually set up a gate, or what's also known as a downward expander. We'll get to the dedicated gate in a second, but just for visualization, this is quite helpful. So if I take this low threshold ratio and turn it to the left, like so, what this is saying is, and I'm going to steepen up the knee here really quickly, whenever the signal falls below this threshold, it's going to get even quieter. And in this case, it's doing so at a 2-to-1 ratio. With an actual gate, this is steepened quite considerably. So obviously with this plugin, we can't go beyond 2-to-1, but even this should do the job for us. Now, if I bring this up quite high at the start, you'll notice that we're going to hear some cutouts pretty early on.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a...
So only the words that she's putting emphasis on are not being affected. And actually what I want is to have this attack to be all the way at its fastest, because I want to make sure that this gate isn't kind of doing any fade in, fade out. I want to keep the integrity of her voice as much as possible. But with this attack set fast, it's even going to sound a little bit crazier.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a sob of pain.
When we do get to that quiet part, it pretty much eliminates it entirely, as you can see.
The shadows.
And then it comes back in kind of drastically. So what we want is to make sure that the gate is not doing anything until it reaches this quiet part here. So I'm just going to start backing down on the threshold a little bit.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a sob of pain. A sense of awe and wonder.
Okay, so obviously it needs to be higher to make sure it's always in here.
For the thoughts that come in the shadows never come in the shine.
So this would probably be about the right setting, and we can actually use a knee to smooth this out. So the joy and beauty of this is that we can even get rid of some of those breaths in between the words, but when we get to that background noise or that hiss that we want to eliminate, it does a pretty good job of eliminating it entirely. So let's just play it back one more time, try to set this up, get a little knee action.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a sob of pain. A sense of awe and wonder I may never well define. For the thoughts that come in the shadows never come in the shine.
So we are struggling to eliminate that entirely, and that really just has to do with this ratio control. But if I go and I use a dedicated gate, that ratio is going to be a lot steeper, so that when the signal falls below threshold, the gate closes, as in it basically just cuts off sound entirely. When she talks and it goes above this threshold, the gate is open and you're hearing signal. That's always the analogy that people use. So if we go in here and try to set this up,
oh, in the depths of midnight.
And this depth control, in case you're curious, is just how extreme is it going to be cutting things off. So I'm going to set it all the way to its most extreme.
Oh, in the depth.
And if we go all the way to the top, the gate is always closed. As I bring this in, we start to open it.
Sleeper sounds like a sob of pain.
But this obviously isn't good enough.
Oh, in the depths of midnight, what fancies haunt the brain, when even the sigh of the sleeper sounds like a sob of pain.
And there, it's completely shut. We're not getting any of that.
For the thoughts that come in the shadows.
And then it comes back in, but you hear the problem is that it doesn't really catch it as fast as it needs to, and that's always the issue with these gates. Very difficult to get this to be absolutely perfect. There are some really good ones out there that can really almost anticipate things in advance, but with this one, you hear that kind of glitch of it trying to come back in as fast as possible, and that's why that attack is as quick as it possibly can be, but it's even not quite fast enough. But that is the idea with the gate. And so what's the use of gating a reverb? Well, there's a couple of things. One instance, and this is not done as commonly today because you can do it with just simple like audio editing, is you can actually kind of cut off some of that decay so that it's not just going on in the background and taking up space. So if we have here this little kick and snare, and we're sending into the reverb like so. This has a pretty lengthy reverb time just so I can show you the example. I can apply a gate just to this reverb and try to get that to kind of cut off a little bit smoother. So, and let's actually just like turn this up a little bit so that we can really hear it. And again, this is purely theoretical. So right now it's kind of glitchy, and that's not what we want. So it should be hearing nothing right now. The gate's entirely closed. Let's also... And we'll start to now bring in some of this reverb. But you can see how tricky this is to get right. And actually, and I did this before, and I knew that this wasn't really going to work. In my opinion, the gate probably wouldn't really work here, and or I just can't get it set up the way that I'd want it to be set up. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and use those dynamics devices because I do have a little bit more control over what's happening. And I'm actually going to do something that's a little bit more experimental here. And... So you can see that it is starting to do some there on the fade out. All right, so without it, and then with it, listen to how that decay fades. So a lot better, obviously. But what I can do is I can actually combine this and then go and start to use a steeper one as we go a little bit quieter. So steepen that out. So without this one. So you can see that this one's only open for a very brief amount of time. Just trying to get this release to taste. And I can even duplicate this once more. I'll add a little bit of knee to smooth that out. And then with this one, I'll go with the steep knee. And so if we were to group these and put them all together, we could listen to the difference here. And in my opinion, this isn't the wisest way to go about doing this, but it does work. And then without it. With it. So when we actually start to get a blend that's a little bit more appropriate, you can hear the effect that it has. But this is very rarely what you would do in this situation. In fact, what I would probably do in a situation like this, and let's say that we really want the reverb attached to the snare sound, I would go and I would actually just drop a reverb onto the snare itself. So I would go in here, just take like one instance of this snare, add in a reverb, and again, we'll go just a little bit crazy with the settings. Just find a mix that I like. Okay, so let's imagine that that's something that I like. I can always consolidate this, just give myself a little bit of extra room. I can bounce it. Okay, cool. Here's my new sound. It has all that reverb built into it, and now I can just go in here and I can edit it. If I need to take the gain. And I can do something like that. So now I have this new snare sound. And it has the reverb attached to it. Okay? So that's something that you can do if you really are finding that the gate is kind of getting in your way. By setting that up, by bouncing it out, by then editing the size of the clip and going in and doing volume automation, you can really kind of do the same effect as the gate. And for me, at least, it goes a lot quicker. The other technique that's absolutely worth showing you that is still used quite frequently today is more of a densening effect, or in some cases, it's actually more of like a stereo widening effect. So I'm going to go in here to this clap sound that we have now, and I'm going to take the width and put it all the way down, okay? So let's get rid of that reverb so we can just hear this now monoed out snare clap combo. So there's nothing stereo about that. And in a lot of cases, that would be totally fine. But let's imagine that we want to add a little bit of stereo width, and we want to add some density. One way to do that is to use a gate, but to use a sidechain gate so that it is only turning on. This reverb is only going to turn on when the snare hits. Otherwise, the channel is going to be muted. It is going to be silent. So if I go in here and I grab the gate, which begins with the letter G. And I set the sidechain up so that it's coming from this snare clap post. What we're going to notice is if I bring this depth all the way up, we're not really hearing any of this reverb. We also have to send in. Now we are hearing the reverb, and it is only applying when the snare or clap hits, but it doesn't sound very good at the moment. It's kind of giving you that like trickly effect at the end. I don't know any other word that really describes that. So we still have to get these settings in here right. And I might allow a little bit of release to still get a little bit extra like tail on the end of this. That, of course, is completely muting the gate, and now we're just going to set it to taste. That sounds about right to me. And then we can go and we can actually blend this back in, as because this is really more of just an effect on the snare. Your listener shouldn't even necessarily know it's a reverb that's being applied. It should almost sound seamless. And of course, we'd probably go in here and tweak the settings in this reverb, but still, we'll see what sort of effect we can get. Without. Just a matter of getting these settings right. And then without the gate, we obviously know we're going to get that run-on tail. So this gate is really only opening when the snare is hitting, and then it's closing, and it's closing pretty quickly. We can allow it to kind of gently slope off. Or again, make it very drastic. But I'm liking the effect of that tail on there. Some of you might be asking, well, why don't you just like put the reverb time down really, really fast? And the answer is, you absolutely could do that if you wanted to. There's really no harm in it. These are just kind of different techniques and different ways of thinking about things. You can get even more experimental here. And for example, you could like have a pad sound or something. And it's kind of like an alternative or a reverse to doing like a sidechain effect. So let's just see if we can actually set something like that up quickly. This video is a little bit more freeform for you than usual. And I sidechain this to like the kick. When is this actually playing and when is it silent? That's the big question. I think that gives you the answer right there. And in this example, even having that little glitchy noise is kind of useful. I kind of like the glitchy, but what's so cool about this is actually now triggering when the kick is hitting, as compared to, you know, the inverse of that, which would be to have this be sidechain compressed and being made quieter when the kick is hitting. So that's kind of the big difference there. And we could actually still achieve that same effect, obviously, by going in here, grabbing the dynamics, sidechaining this to the kick. There's something about that that just isn't as cool. And you might be thinking, well, like, what would we want to do if we wanted this to be like flipped around, where this is only triggering when the kick isn't hitting? And the answer would be to actually go in here to duplicate this, call this one ghost. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move these all over one. Okay, and let's change the color of that. And then now all I have to do is change this to ghost pre. We'll mute it. So now you'll hear that it's cut off every time the kick isn't hitting. We can actually do something a little bit fun here and actually make more of like a rhythmic pattern at the end. Cool. So something like that would probably work nicely. So just a couple of different ideas of working with gates, and obviously this is going beyond just the gating of reverb, but since I'm not planning to talk a lot about gates on this website, figured might as well just throw this one in here for good measure. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope you learned something new in this more kind of casual format.